Hello and welcome once again to CSIT 208, Multimedia and Web Design. This is the 7th session and we are going to continue with our introduction to HTML. Now after completing this session, you should be able to create links for sending emails, describe the uses of the anchor tag, create ordered and unordered lists, and create HTML forms and describe the basic uses of each of the input tags. Now we have a typical example of a link that we can use to send an email. You see a link on the website, you want to click on it to be able to trigger a mail client on the host PC. You use the ahref, but this time around, the value of the href attribute should contain a mail to with a colon, then the email address of the destination. Now, anchor tags enable users to jump to specific places within a page, in as much as it is also able to help you navigate across web pages. Now, 2 steps are necessary to create an anchor tag. First, you must create the anchor tag itself, then you must create a link to it from another point within the same document. So to create the anchor tag itself, we use the A and we specify a name instead of the href that we are used to navigate from one page to the other in creating the anchor tag. And that is the point where you want the user to jump to. Now, you create a link that is going to jump to that particular anchor tag. So what you do is that you create another A tag, but this time around specify href as attribute, and then the value should contain the £, and then the name of the anchor tag you described earlier on the part of the page you want to jump to. So this is an example of the anchor. Now over here we have a tag, which is the anchor tag, and an attribute name with value chap2. Now this is the point we want our visitor to jump to from anywhere within the page. Now to be able to jump to that point from within the page, we define another a tag with attribute href. Now the value of that attribute is supposed to contain the name that you specified at the point where you want to jump, but it should be preceded with a £, as defined here. We move on to ordered lists. There are times where you want to display a list of items. Now ordered list just numbers your lists for you in a particular order you define. It could be in ascending order, it could be in descending order, and then list, once it's ordered, can also be in various forms. It could be numbered using Roman numerals or alphabetical order, and you just have to define the way you want it. So this is a typical example. And the ordered list uses the tag OL, and each of the list items has the tag LI surrounding it. Now, as I mentioned, on the ordered list, you can type equal to X as an attribute. Now, the specification for the X will be A for capital letters. That means if you want to order your list alphabetically, and then the list is going to start from A down to Z, you can use type equal to A, that is capital A. If you want it to be ordered in alphabetical order using lowercase, you use. So the type attribute of the ordered list specifies the way you want your list to be ordered. If it's ordered alphabetically from A to Z, capital letters, you use capital A in place of X. If you want lowercase, you use small a in place of X. If you want capital Roman numerals, you use capital I in place of X. And if you want lowercase Roman numerals, you use small I or lowercase I in place of X. By default, it will number them 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now, there are unordered lists. If you're familiar with word processors, I am sure you have seen a number of unordered lists where you can just select it from your toolbar and it will do it for you. In HTML, you're supposed to specify UL, and within that UL, you specify LI for each of your individual items, and it will come with bullet points. Now, with the ordered list, we were able to change the way it is presented from 1, 2, 3 to A, B, C, or Roman numerals. The same way for the unordered list, you can specify the kind of bullet points you want. So that one as well, it takes the type, attribute, and the value of the shape. Now circle will correspond to an empty round bullet, square will correspond to square bullet, and then disk will correspond to a solid round bullet. This is usually the default value that we have seen. Now forms. HTML has forms that are used to pick user input. Forms can be used for so many things, from opinion polls to user preferences and other kinds of information that you want to get from the user. There are two basic components of web form: the shell part, the part that the user fills out, and the script, which processes the information. What we are interested in this course is the shell part. Now, HTML tags are used to create form shell. Now, using HTML, you can create form elements like text boxes, radio buttons, checkboxes, and so many others. Drop downs, all the input elements you can think about, even file input where you can browse and pick a particular file. Now, this slide shows us an example of an HTML form where we have a text box, in fact, two of them, one for first name, one for last name. There's a type of shirt, now sleeveless. Now this is a drop down, and you'll be able to have a collection of entries in there. Now there are other elements like radio buttons. Now how they work is that when you select one, the other one is disabled. So you can only select one at a time. So you can use it for something like gender. The person can either be male or female. So once male is selected, it will uncheck female. Now you can have another type of form element known as the checkbox. Now the checkboxes allow you to select multiple. So as you can see, you can be a student at the same time you're a Christian. So if you are picking information from users that requires multiple choices, you can use the checkbox input tag. We also have text area that allows you to type a lot of information, and it gives you formatting features so that you'll be able to see clearly what you are typing. And we also have buttons that perform specific actions and ones that do not. So for specific actions, you have a submit button and then you have a reset button. Now you can always alter the label written on these buttons the way you want, but by default, if you do not specify it, it will only write out the defaults, which is submit for submit and then reset for reset. To create a form shell, you need the form tag. Now there are two very important attributes that each of these form tags take. That is the action, where the data that is collected from the form will be sent, and then the method by which it will send it. Is it sending it through the browser or is sending it through the address bar as part of the URL? We spoke about the URL, which is the Uniform Resource Locator. So you specify the method by which the data will be sent to the subsequent pages. Now, after you create your form, you create the form element within the form tag, and after that you close your form tag with a /form, as we've discussed as to how to close tags. Now, to create a text box, you type input, the type equal to text, you give it a name to uniquely identify the text box, and then a value to specify what value goes inside that text box. So you realize that if you specify a value here, immediately the page is loaded, that value will be written inside the text box. But if you want your user to enter the text himself, you do not put any value in there. You just do value equal to empty quotes. Now the size and then the max length. The max length determines the length of characters that go in there. Now, assuming you are taking the age of people and you know that nobody's age exceeds 3 digits, you know that everybody's age is between 1 digit and 2 digits, you can have a max length of 3. That means that once you start typing, after the third character, it will not allow you to type anything again. Now, some of the attributes of the text boxes, as I mentioned, the name, the value, the size, and the max length, as I have explained in the previous slide. Now, this is a display of the text box. Now, on the left-hand side, we have the source code that produces this output on the right-hand side. So we basically have a text box, 2 of them, one for first name, one for last name, and then the display is given on the right-hand side. You can also create text areas, which are larger text boxes that allow you to type bulk data. Now there's a wrap attribute, which allows the cursor to move automatically to the next line when the user types. Because when the horizontal space is exhausted, it will move on to the next line for you to continue typing automatically. Now this is how we represent a text area in HTML. Now this is the code for the text area. Now as we saw in the previous slides, we have this code for making the word comment bold. Now there will be a line break to break the format into the next line, and then we have our text area. We've given it a unique name to be able to uniquely identify it, the number of rows and then the number of columns, and then it's going to wrap. So whilst the user is typing in there, it will automatically move the cursor to the next line if the horizontal space is full. Creating radio buttons. Now to create radio buttons, as I mentioned earlier, radio buttons are form elements that allow you to select only one of the options at a time. The other options are disabled once one of them is selected. Now this is how you can create a radio button. You use the input type, and the type value is radio. Now you give it a name. One thing you should note here is that if you want that feature I mentioned about disabling one when one is selected to be active on radio buttons, make sure that all the radio buttons belonging to a particular group have the same name. So for example, if you're dealing with gender and you do input type equal to radio, name equal to gender, make sure that if the label is male, the next one you do for female should have the same name, gender, so that we'll know that it belongs to the same group. That is when the web browser will be able to process it very well. So an example, we can see here that we have size, which has been boldened. Now we'll have input type equal to radio, and then the label is large. Input type equal to radio, the label is medium. Input type radio, the label is small. Now when you check the values correspond to the labels, but the name is the same across each of them. Size, size, size. This tells us that once you select large, the focus will be taken away from medium and small. If you select medium, it will be taken away from large and small, and if you select small, it will be taken away from medium and large. Checkboxes are created in a similar way. You do your input type equal to checkbox, you give it a name, you give it a value, and you specify a label. Now, as I said, checkboxes can be used for multiple selections. Now, creating drop-downs, one of the most interesting form elements. First of all, you are going to specify a select tag, and then inside of it, you have options for each of the individual options within your drop-down, and this is how it is done. You have your select opening and closing, and then for each of the options, you have an opening and closing. Now, the options take values. Now, these are the values that are going to be passed to be processed. So assuming mango is selected, it is these mangoes in here that will be sent to the server. So for instance, you can have mangoes here, and then the value will contain 1. Papaya, and the value will contain 2. Guava, and the value will contain 3. What happens is that when papaya is selected, it is 2 that will be sent to the server and not papaya. Now we create submit buttons to be able to submit the form to a server. Now to create a submit button, all you need is the input type submit. Now this will have submit written on the button. If you do not want it this way, you need to specify a value attribute of the input type submit. So an example is right here, value equal to buy now. This will create a button that has buy now written on it. And the same applies to reset. To create a reset button, we have input type equal to reset. And you can also specify the value in the same way you change the text on the submit.